Welcome to the CFB Dynasty Podcast with hosts Matt Knowles and Brian McElfish.
Hey everyone, how you doing out there? It's time for the CFB Dynasty College Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Matt Knowles. That guy over there is BMAC. He is the founder and the creator of CFBDynasty.com. We're going to be talking about our reactions to Week 6, what's going to be happening in Week 7. There's a lot of stuff we need to talk about today, a lot of stuff we want to talk about today, so let's get right down to it. First, BMAC, how you doing today? How are you feeling about what happened in Week 6?
Oh man, it was an awful Week 6 for my team. If you run down my roster real quick and who I started, feeling pretty good about it going into the week. But I had 2 touchdowns outside of the quarterback, which was really rough. So I lost a really low scoring, terrible pillow fight of a game between me and Josh Reed. But Daquan Fan had a pretty good game at 27, but then you look down, Marquez Cooper and Kent State was never able to get it going running the ball against Miami of Ohio. He ended with 4.6. Shipley, man, he's been up and down, not up and down. He's been consistently fine. He's not like putting up the 33, 43 type of games. He's, comfortably in the 12 to 25 range every week and not getting a ton of touches. Hopefully that changes, but Clemson beat down Boston College 31-3. Shipley ended with a touchdown and 33 yards for 10 points in fantasy. Rice went off with 12 catches, 122 yards, no touchdowns. I had Tyler Scott for Cincinnati go down with an injury in the first quarter, didn't stat. Worthy, 29 yards and a touchdown. Bowers didn't score. Chase Brown had a bunch of yards, didn't score. Just a big struggle bus for me last week, but we'll be hopefully turning it around this week. How about you, man?
So, I was happy with the fact that I got some wins. As you've heard us say in the podcast before, last week I was going to New York Comic Con. So when we recorded this, I was actually at New York Comic Con on the show floor this past week. And if you've ever been to a gigantic show like that, Friday and Saturday are so busy that you almost have to take refuge behind your table. I left the table one time on Saturday to get coffee. And I basically had to just let the crowd kind of like a wave on the ocean, kind of get me back to my table. It was so busy. There was a queue of 70 people long just to get on the escalator. But I'm always trying to pay attention, trying to watch as much college football, as much pro football as I can when I'm at a show like that. And even though I won my games, I had buyer's remorse over someone I did not buy, someone you heard us talk about last week on the podcast. It sucks when you don't get injury reports in college and you're not sure when you hear a guy's got a shoulder injury, especially as a running back. You've got to be very careful, especially in leagues like ours where you've got limited pickups. I skipped out on picking up Israel Abanikanda for Pitt. And just like every other person out there that did not pick him up, Israel Abanikanda, if you do not know what this cat did last week, 320 yards, 6 touchdowns, the most out of a running back since Jared Patterson's insane 409-yard, 8-touchdown performance in 2020. As far as I remember, I think we'd have to go back and look. I think it may be the number 2 overall running back performance of all time, at least in the last decade. And sitting out there, on our waiver wire last week, everybody in our chat was just going in, man, I'm really stupid for not picking him up. But you also were smart. It was kind of hard to put that waiver wire pick in on a guy that had his arm in a sling after the past week's game.
Maybe that's some good content to build where you said the best single game fantasy performances of college football history. That might be something we could build. We've done I think it was this summer, we did the all-time season-long performances of all time, and Barry Sanders crushes everyone else at running back, etc. It's really fun content to kind of see, and then you can check out your current players and kind of see how they're stacking up against all-time performances. But yeah, man, the best games of all time. That'd be a good one.
Yeah, that was, and the thing about Abanaconda's game, even though it was a huge game, scored tons of points, that Jared Patterson game literally changed the outcome of fantasy playoffs. That happened in the fantasy playoffs. And basically, if you had Jared Patterson at that point, you know that, I don't remember, was it in the semis or was it the finals?
It was the final
So, finals,
for
if you had
fantasy,
Jared,
yeah.
yeah, if you had Jared Patterson, you basically won your game. Abanaconda, you weren't going to the playoffs because you had him, but that's a huge guy. We'll talk about him a little bit more in the podcast. But that was a huge performance, the top performance in the week. I think he was the top scorer, period, including quarterbacks. He was the top scorer, the number one scorer in all of fantasy last week, if I remember correctly. That's crazy.
That's correct. Yep.
Crazy. And you're talking about a Power 5 school. He wasn't playing FCS Cupcake. He was playing Virginia Tech in conference. If I was a Virginia Tech defender, I would be feeling really bad right now because, you got to know when the fourth quarter is coming that Abanaconda is going to get the ball again. How are you going to let him go out there and drop 320, break Tony Dorsett's pit record? That is huge.
That's insane. Another guy that I didn't start that would have won me my game, but I still would not make that decision. Jackson Dart had a pretty good game. I think he put up like 45 fantasy points, and Jonathan Mingo had 48. Kind of a breakout game for a lot of fantasy guys. Kind of flip flopped on who they thought would be Ole Miss's wide receiver one, and it's been not good for fantasy, not consistent. So maybe Mingo will get hot and finish the season hot as Dart continues to improve. Would you expect him to do under Kiffin? We just thought it was going to happen. Week one, we thought we were going to see what we saw from Jackson Dart at USC. We thought we were going to see that in the spring, and then it took him up till like into the season to actually win that job. So we'll see if we can get that Ole Miss offense rolling along, the passing game specifically rolling along there.
All right, so next up, you got CJ Stroud. He's back on track. Let's talk a little bit about CJ Stroud.
Yeah, big game for him. And he, shared it between Egbuka, between Harrison Jr. Like they all had really great fantasy performances last week. So back on track, and that's why we very commonly have him up at number one in our quarterback rankings. How about this? How does this sound? Consistently great Bo Nix yet again in fantasy.
Yeah, that's not something that you expected coming into this year, but it's nice when you got a guy that you can count on every single week. There's not a lot of them this year, especially and we're not talking about wide receivers at the moment, but you look at the wide receiver position, and it's very rare to have a guy that is actually getting consistent points at wide receiver. So it's good to go anywhere and get somebody that is going to score good every week.
Yeah, I wonder how Auburn fans feel about that. It's got to be rough. So we've got Quentin Johnston. Thank you for joining the elite fantasy performances. Like he was a easy top 10 wide receiver. Well, I'd say easy top 10. He's definitely easy top 15 fantasy receiver going into the season across the board, and just has done nothing. He was averaging like 3 points a game. And he, I think, went for 34, and great game out of him. Another receiver, this is more on the Devy style platform here. We're looking at Evan Stewart. I think he got like 17 or 18 targets against Alabama and had a really good game. Couple of fantastic catches, and there's certainly opportunity for more if he continues to get. I mean, you can't expect him to continue to get 18 targets or something like that in a game. But if he's getting 10, 12, and a couple of those are deep shots every game, which they should be, you got to like Evan Stewart. You can probably buy him not as low as you could have a couple weeks ago. But if you're looking for a trade target, like on the cheap, you might be able to sway him away in some cases because he's potentially about to bust out depending on what happens with that A&M offense. And that was just a great game overall. I guess you didn't catch much of the Bama A&M game, but I
didn't get to catch much. I did catch the score. I was following the score, and it's just one of those. It should never have been the kind of game that it was for certain.
Yeah, it was a fun game to watch. Jalen Milroe, didn't have the breakout. I asked some of our guys on the Discord that morning because at that point, still hadn't heard anything about Bryce Young, and I was a little nervous. I had Daquan Finn or Jalen Milroe that I was debating, but Milroe, couple fumbles and at least one pick, and just didn't have a great game. Didn't have a terrible game in terms of fantasy. I think he scored maybe 4 or 5, just less than Daquan Finn, but risky start going into a big game this week against Tennessee. It's going to be a fun one where we still haven't heard much positive about Bryce Young. And then Texas OU, like that was in the last week 6 reaction that just stood out. Like that Oklahoma offense was pitiful without Dillon Gabriel. So they should get Gabriel back and have things turn around for Mims and the rest of that offense. But dang, to get shut out.
But still, the thing is, it's Oklahoma. Oklahoma should not be that shallow of a roster. That team should be deep. There should be someone else that can come in and be able to, I mean, maybe they're not going to win the game, but 0 points. I mean, that's horrible. How is Oklahoma in a situation where they're that shallow roster-wise?
Agreed. Unacceptable.
All right, so BMAC put up a really cool tweet just before this past week's game started. If you're on the CFB Dynasty Twitter, it's just CFB Dynasty, at CFB Dynasty. You go up there and put up a tweet that says the all-bust year-to-date in college fantasy. Now, the cool thing about this is, and this has happened a couple of times already this year, I talked about you want to stay away from Boise State 2 weeks ago when they fired their coach or their coordinator. Their quarterback decided to transfer. And what have they done since then? They've had 2 amazing performances. They've gotten back on the schneid. They're doing exactly what you'd expect a Boise State offense to do after we called them out. BMAC puts this tweet up. We're going to let him go through it. And as soon as he puts this tweet up, you know that these guys were reading this in the locker room because virtually every one of them decided to actually show up this week. BMAC, let's go to the tweet.
Yeah, so Van Dyke was our all-bust quarterback, and there's a few guys in there. We had some good dialogue going back and forth in the comments there, but Van Dyke is who I went with, and had a good bounce-back game. He was solidified as the starter, and you had Travion Henderson, who finally went over 100 and got a touchdown for Ohio State. Tavion Thomas of Utah, he came back, had a really good game this past week. Kayshon Boutte got his first touchdown of the season. Quentin Johnston, we talked about him. He busted out for 34 fantasy points finally. And Jermaine Burton got his first touchdown. Now, Michael Trigg got some bad news. He's basically going to be out for the season, so he will finish the year on the all-bust team. We'll see if the rest of these guys can kind of pick it up for the stretch run. It's so crazy that we're halfway through the college football season, which means we're closer and closer to the fantasy playoffs.
All right, so we're gonna have a really fun segment here coming up in just a little bit. But before we get there, we're gonna go to a very special milk carton for this week. Very special milk carton. So BMAC really didn't want to do this segment this week because most of the people on the segment come from his homemade CFB Dynasty roster. So we're going to start off.
Nothing to say. Nothing at all.
We're going to start off with Marquez Cooper, Kent State. We've talked about him a lot, that Kent State offense. There's some guys that are really performing well, but Marquez Cooper, only 41 total yards this week. That's not good. That's not good.
Continue to myself here.
Come on, Marquez Cooper. And then another guy on BMX roster, not somebody that he would have played in any circumstance this week, but Phil Jerkovic, you had 188 yards, 3 sacks, and a fumble lost, single-digit points as a high-end college quarterback. Yes, you're against Clemson, but come on, you got to do a little bit better than that for BMAC. BMAC still muted. I love it. Next, we're going to go to a guy that has tormented BMAC for years. He is probably the single most frustrating player in college fantasy football for the last few years, and that's Eric Gilbert. Are you going to play this year or what? Don't play for a couple weeks, suit up, warming up, still don't play. He's like that fool's gold. You think you're going to have this guy, you keep holding on to him, but you just can't bear to cut him. because you think he's going to either do something great here or he's going to be somebody great in the pros. But Eric Gilbert is just the fool's gold on BMAC's roster. Can't play him, can't cut him. He's just there taking up a roster spot.
Guess I'll just continue to wait.
And then to be nice to BMAC, got one guy from my roster that's going to make it on here. Mac Hippenhammer from Miami of Ohio, highly touted wide receiver, top 10 preseason ranking, 1 reception for 5 yards. We're into the conference schedule now. You got to be doing better than 1 reception for 5 yards. Come on, man. And then last but not least, we already talked about him once. We are going to have the milk carton. You turn it around, the entire Oklahoma offense. What the world is going on in Oklahoma? We should never see Oklahoma getting shut up. I don't care if they're playing Alabama. Oklahoma should never be dropping a goose egg at this point in the season. If you started somebody on Oklahoma's offense, you probably had a pretty crappy day, pretty crappy weekend last weekend.
Yeah, like you said, that was just unbelievable that they could just get no points.
So that, and it wasn't even like, I mean, if it was like, hey, it was a 10-0 game, it's one thing, but dropping 49 on them, you know that some of those guys probably just quit halfway through the game. What do we got to do to get off this field? Can we run clock? Can we have 10-minute running clock quarters like they did last week? But yeah, that's rough. So like I said, that's a quick version of the milk carton this week, partially because we want to get to a really fun news segment. I know that BMAC's goal this week is to have nobody on the milk cartons for next week.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
All right, so we got a great news segment this week. It's a one-time thing. So we're going to go to the mid-season redraft. BMAC, tell everybody what this means. What is the mid-season redraft? What are we talking about?
All right, so if we were to wipe all the rosters right now for your league and redraft them right now for the rest of the season for like to position your roster best. So it's kind of a reset if you're doing a mid-season draft for the rest of this season to try and win the title. So who would be your pick, and then how does it compare to what we thought going into the season? So there's definitely some big differences that are kind of surprising. But at number 1, if you took it's basically one or the other guy, one of them is good, one of them is not on our list at all for the top 24 picks if we were to do a redraft right now. And I've got Bijan Robinson number 1. If we were drafting right now and I had the first pick for the rest of this season, I'd take Bijan Robinson. He's averaging 25.8 fantasy points a game and just super consistent all season long. What do you think about that one?
I think that it's kind of hard to go away from Bijan Robinson. I think one thing that people need to understand too, the guidelines for this redraft is not as much about what they've done to this point. It's what you think they're going to do as the season continues. It's redraft till the end of the season. It's not dynasty. It's not these are guys we want to keep on our team for next season or guys we're looking college to pro. It's just guys to get through to the end of the season. Kind of hard to not take Bijan Robinson. I know that I would. We'll get to this a little bit later. I know if I was drafting, I would probably draft a little differently based on what I think the guys are going to do for the rest of the year. But that's good. That's why you have different guys doing drafts.
That's good. All right. So at number 2, Mohamed Ibrahim, who a lot of people were skeptical. I think we had him ranked higher than everyone else in our league, but we certainly didn't have him he's averaging a little better than Bijan Robinson in fantasy points per game. He's coming off an injury. Looks like he'll be good to go, I think, this week against Illinois on the road. So he's got 108 fantasy points to date, which puts him at RB 25 for fantasy points. But in terms of points per game, he's number 2 at 27 fantasy points per game. What do you think there?
Like I said, it's kind of hard to say anything bad about any of the guys at the top of this draft. Ibrahim, I'm just glad to see him. I'm just glad to see him back near the top of the list. I feel like it was unjust at the beginning of the season how low he was. I know that there was people having him at like RB 20 in some rankings. I'm like he was definitely not that guy. I mean, he was going to come back from the injury, so I'm glad to see him actually performing where you would expect.
Now number 3 is more of a projection based on what he's done the last couple weeks. He's currently the RB12 in fantasy points, but Jahmyr Gibbs for Alabama, especially with the Bryce Young injury, I think they're going to lean on that running game from Jahmyr Gibbs, and he's averaging just 19 fantasy points per game, but over the last 2 weeks, he's averaging a ton more than that. So I expect him to continue to kind of blossom into what we all thought he would be at Alabama going into the season. So if you drafted him, you were probably having to draft him during the season around this spot. He was, I think, a top 5 running back average draft position, somewhere in there. So him at 3 and kind of gearing up towards the playoffs, you got to love it if you took him. But whereas earlier in the season, the first 4 weeks, you're like, man, when is he going to get more than 10 or 12 touches in a game?
Yeah, definitely some patience needed to be used with Jahmyr Gibbs right there, because again, this is not just based on year to date. If you look at the last few weeks, just like you can look at on CFB Dynasty on the rankings, you can look at the last 3 weeks, see what he's trending to do. He is absolutely trending upwards and trending to be in that spot where we expect him to be at the beginning of the year. So number 4, the team at 4 drafted Raheem Sanders from Arkansas. What do you think there, B-Mac?
So he's getting the full load at running back, and that's something that was questionable going into the season. And he's just the man. He's getting 21.5 fantasy points per game. He's currently the RB5 in total fantasy points from the running back position. And the schedule looks really good. So they play at BYU, which is really, it's overall a difficult game, but that's got a high over-under. Expect a lot out of Sanders this week. Then they play on the road again at Auburn, but then they get Liberty. Then they get a kind of struggling LSU team, which we'll see kind of how they are. Are they spiraling by then, or are they making a comeback to finish the year strong? We'll see. Then they host Ole Miss, and then they play on the road at Missouri during the fantasy championship. So I like the schedule, and he's someone that's an every week starter. It would be hard to sit him in any of those games.
And then the team at 5 drafted Chase Brown from Illinois. I think that one of the things you want to look for when you're looking for guys that are going to help you to get to the playoffs and beyond is consistency and how many times they're touching the ball. Wide receivers are always going to be the wild card there, because a wide receiver needs to have the quarterback get them the ball for them to get their touches. Chase Brown, for the last 5 weeks, has had over 20 or more carries in every game. He's had over 100 yards in every game, and that's huge. Now, his touchdown numbers are a little bit down. You want to see him getting a little more touchdowns than he has. But when you've got a running back at a Power 5 school that is getting 20, 25, 30 carries every single week and going over 100 yards, that's the kind of performance that you want to see, because those are the kind of guys that are probably going to have a breakout game. They're going to find somebody where they can just blow up, and at those 20, 25 carries are going to turn into a 200-yard game and 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, he had a touchdown called back against Iowa, and if touchdowns are weak, but yet he's still averaging 21 fantasy points a game. So you expect, when the touchdowns start to come, if they pile up, he could be higher on this list for sure. But you kind of just are expecting them to go up. And Illinois, ranked now. At number 5, we've got our first receiver off the board, Rashee Rice. He is our wide receiver 13. He's at 22 fantasy points per game. And listen to this in terms of targets. Now, how does this sound? Last 5 games: 12, 13, 19, 13, 18.
Yeah, that's an incredible number of targets for a single week.
So like, you love the UTSA wide receivers and the points they're putting up. You love the Ohio State receivers and the points they're putting up. But you do expect Smith and Jigba to come back at some point, and he's gonna take some of those targets away. The UTSA 3, they share the targets. The third receiver that's not in our top 24, he's had, I think, 17 and 18 targets the last 2 games. But yeah, Rashee Rice is the lone main target there at SMU. So I like him as the top receiver. In my opinion, there's not another receiver that I would want to have ahead of him right now. How about you? What do
Well,
you
you know
feel
what?
about that?
I think that the explanation you just gave there is a great one, because people could look at this and go, you know, numbers that the first pick off the board for this number 6 team is the wide receiver 13. Why would they not go for wide receivers 1 through 12? And I think that you've proven through the statistics and through the trends, if you're getting that many targets, like we just said, you have to have the quarterback getting you the ball for you to be able to produce as a wide receiver. And when you're getting double-digit targets every single game, that's going to be more chances for you to actually do something. And like you said, there's not other options that are getting double-digit targets or 8 to 10 targets at SMU. So he's going to be the guy. So I think that's a great explanation as to why Rashee Rice goes there. I'm not going to doubt that coach's logic whatsoever.
And the schedule is pretty favorable. So they've got Navy this week. They play Cincinnati at home. So it's good that they get that game at home, but that's going to be a really tough matchup for them. But I still don't think you can sit Rashee Rice in any game because of those targets. And then they have Tulsa, Houston, South Florida, Tulane. So love the schedule for him to continue putting up those numbers. And he's another one where if the touchdowns come, he's going to skyrocket up the receiver rankings.
So then the next one, this is when things get kind of interesting, because if you're drafting somebody for the rest of the season, you have to pay attention to the buys. And week 7, 8, and 9 this year, every year, the way the buys fall are interesting, and they take on a little bit different dynamic. But this year, it's like everybody has got buys in 7, 8, and 9, including Ohio State. So you're drafting a guy that you can't even play this week. So let's talk about Marvin Harrison, the wide receiver 4.
So he's averaging 20.75 points per game, which is less than Emeka Egbuka, who's up there, one of the top receivers. But he's playing the position of Smith-Njigba. I think they're gonna work it out to where they're all in the field and all getting touches. But I think Harrison will be less affected when Smith-Njigba comes back. So I like him there. He's currently the wide receiver 4. I think that's going to continue. You can always take from that Ohio State offense. And then at team 8, position 8 here, I've got Zach Charbonnet, who's been incredibly consistent, and UCLA is rolling along. I like DTR. I like Charbonnet a lot to finish out this season strong.
All right, then you got Zachary Franklin. We talked about UTSA some. Now, this might be the guy that I would have come off the board first. UTSA, it may not be the guy I'd have come off the board first. I will say this. You got Zachary Franklin here. I like Frank Harris a lot. Now, I think he might be one of the best guys to have on your team moving forward. But like you said before we got on here, the top 16 or so quarterbacks are so close. It may not do you a lot of good to invest that highly in a quarterback, because there's such a huge there's not as big drop off from 1 to 16. So even if Frank Harris is probably the most valuable player on the team, you may not want to draft him. You may want to go to their running backs and wide receivers first. So let's talk a little bit about Zachary Franklin and why he's up there with the 9th pick in the first round.
Yeah, so let me pull up these stats real quick. So Zachary Franklin going into the season was he was the pretty much consensus top guy for them, but Takorian Clark has kind of outplayed him in terms of fantasy points. He has the one big game though with 44 fantasy points, 12 targets, 9 catches, 217 yards, and 3 touchdowns. The rest of them has still been good. It's not bad, but Clark, he's got so last 5 games, his targets are 10, 7, 12, 9, and 7. And then let me give you Franklin now, Matt. So it's 12, 12, 12, 8, and 8. So you love the consistency there. And then how about this for Joshua Cephas, who's currently wide receiver 3 in fantasy on this roster. 13 targets, 8, 7, 8, and 11. So, man, it's pretty incredible, all these UTSA receivers. But yeah, I like Franklin for his consistency and touchdowns.
And the oddity here too in this draft, because you guys aren't looking at the sheet that we are, but the first 8 picks are all Power 5 teams. That's the first guy from a Group of 5 team that's come off the board. And normally at the end of the season is when you're going to have in-conference games. You're going to have a lot of the Group of 5 guys really starting to explode. So it's interesting to see that Zakhari Franklin is the first Group of 5 guy off of the board at this point. You would think that there'd be some Group of 5s that'd be jumping up a little bit higher.
Yep.
Speaking of Group of 5, we got UAB Dwayne McBride. He's the running back 17, but he is the number 10 running back. What you got right there for him, B-Mac?
Touches, man. Like, that's another thing that you want out of a receiver. So if you go back, he didn't play September 1st, and then against Liberty, 20 carries, 177 yards, and a touchdown. He follows that up against Georgia Southern, which is pretty solid. 28 carries, 223 yards, 4 touchdowns. Then he goes against Rice, 27, 121, and a touchdown. And then last week, didn't really play a lot of the game, but 12 carries, 120 yards, and 3 more touchdowns. He's a must-start just about every week. And then we've got your boy, Banaconda, that you talked about. He's number 1 in fantasy points per game, obviously, with that monster performance. But he's got a tougher schedule, playing some harder defenses the rest of the season. Maybe Rodney Hammond comes back and takes some of his carries sometime soon. So we'll see. That's why our current CFF RB1 is the 11th pick off the board.
So I'll tell you this. If I was a part of this draft, if I was team number 1, based on moving forward in the season, I probably would draft Banaconda number 1, because even though we had this massive game last week, outside of his shoulder injury game, he has already been crushing it all year. Like we said earlier, he wasn't playing against some, Sisters of Mercy last week. He was playing against Virginia Tech that prides himself on defense, and he had the best game in Pitt Panther history.
Yep.
I would have a hard time not putting him up there at the top, specifically based on the rules of this draft. Somebody that you want just for the rest of the season. Are they going to be able to help you get to a fantasy football championship? And it's difficult to take a guy that's already had, 40 and 70 or close to that games this season and not put him up there really up near the top.
And I may have misspoken on the draft. Or, I'm sorry, the remaining schedule. So they play Louisville this week. They play North Carolina on the road. They host Syracuse. They play at Virginia. They host Duke, and then they play at Miami. Like, that's not bad at all. Like, you can start them. You would definitely start them every game.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So then the next one on the board, so the last pick of the first round, and we're going to probably, once we get to the end of the first round, probably go a little bit quicker through the second round. So last pick of the first round, team number 12 picks Decorian Clark from UTSA. So this is the second person from UTSA that's been picked, and this is the first team that's had 2 guys off the board, which is pretty crazy to think that the Runners have 2 guys in the first round. Wild.
I know. And it'll all change next year. We've got Ollie Jennings at number 13. He's averaging 24 a game. He's got a tough matchup this week at Coastal Carolina. But yeah, Ollie Jennings is putting up 24 a game right now.
Then the first quarterback off the board, QB1 on the list, doesn't even get picked until the second round. BMAC, tell us a little bit more about why the quarterbacks go so low in this redraft.
It's just because there's I think 15 or 16 players all within that 30 to 40 point range, which makes quarterbacks less valuable. So if you loved him, you could have taken him a little bit earlier if you wanted to. The schedule is like this, where it's Duke this week, Pitt, UVA, and then it's at Wake, then it's Georgia Tech, then it's a rivalry game against NC State in the fantasy championship. So there's a couple tough ones in there with Wake and NC State, but is QB1 right now. He's putting up 40 points a game, and taking him over Stroud would be difficult. But if you're just positioning yourself for the rest of the season, it's not crazy.
So then we had the mini run on QB, CJ Stroud from Ohio State coming up next.
Yep, no need to talk about him. They're just a machine. The only thing that stops CJ Stroud is when their running backs take over. So I don't doubt that that's going to happen a couple games where Henderson hopefully gets back super healthy along with Mayan Williams, and they can take over games on their own. So we'll see. It's just kind of a product of game flow and who scores the early touchdowns, because if it's running backs dominating the first quarter touchdowns, it's not a good sign for Stroud in terms of being able to pass the ball in a blowout win.
All right, then we go back to wide receiver, another group of 5 receiver, Keelan Stokes from Tulsa.
Yep, love Keelan Stokes, love this Tulsa offense. Him and Bryn just have a great connection. He's averaging 20 fantasy points a game, and he's getting great touches every single week, very consistent.
And then the next one off the board, very interesting, decided to go in the second round with a tight end. Now, tight ends are always tough, and this is the opposite of what you're going to get at the quarterback position. There is a humongous drop-off at tight end outside of the top 2 guys. So they decided they wanted to jump up, get that tight end, and hopefully be able to still get some of those upper-end guys getting into the 3rd and 4th round. But you got Brock Bowers from UGA that goes with the 5th pick in the second round.
And you could argue higher, honestly. Take a look at him versus Sakari Franklin. Bowers has a higher fantasy points per game. That's crazy, isn't it?
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable that you have a tight end that's going to be doing that. But again, there's only a couple tight ends out there that are going to have that situation going on. So, sometimes it's worth it if you can get that guy that'll help you to if you may have a net, you might get 15 more points than your opponent's tight end position. You can pick that up at your running back or wide receiver if you've drafted well. You may not be able to pick it up at tight end.
Yep, and we'll go a little rapid fire here to finish. So we've got A.T. Perry next for Wake, and that offense has been great. Perry's the top receiver, so just expect that to continue to roll throughout the rest of the season. We've got Blake Corum, who could have been higher, but Donovan Edwards is coming back, getting healthier, and Michigan is actually going to start playing teams with a pulse this week. So we'll see how that goes as the rest of the season continues, between potentially splitting touches and playing a more difficult schedule. Michael Mayer, Notre Dame, he's actually averaging more fantasy points per game than Brock Bowers, so you could argue that, but I just think that UGA offense is a bit more potent than Notre Dame. So we'll see. Hopefully Notre Dame can kind of pick it up on the offensive side.
Then we got the second guy from the UNC offense, Josh Downs, considered wide receiver 60. Why do you think Josh Downs is up so high in the draft right now?
Yeah, he's just he'll continue to get better and get those touchdowns. He's healthy now, and this just held him back just a little bit. So he's only got a total of 73.9 fantasy points on the season, but he's averaging in the games that he plays 18.48. So that's going to continue to rise, I feel like, and very safe pick the rest of the year, going along with our current QB1, Drake May.
All right, then Xavier Hutchinson, Iowa State. Iowa State just to jump into the rankings right now, wide receiver 7.
Yeah, so take a look or listen at these targets here. So Hutchinson, the last 5 games, it's pretty absurd. 19, 11, 13, 19, 17.
That's unbelievable. You gotta think that opposing defenses are going to make that number go way down as the season goes on, cut him off first, force them to go somewhere else.
You would think so, but I mean, that Iowa State offense has been pretty pitiful. But if you're going to have anyone, it should be Hutchinson with those numbers.
And if I would have told you, if you would have told me that the team that had the most number of players drafted in this redraft in the first 2 rounds was going to be the UTSA Roadrunners, I would have said that you're crazy. But 3 of the top 24 picks, UTSA, Frank Harris. Love the way Frank Harris plays. Great passing quarterback, great running quarterback. Really like seeing his numbers. He's got Florida International coming up. Florida International is a team that got beat 73-0 by Western Kentucky earlier in the year. This week is set up for him to have a crushing game. So Frank Harris could really jumpstart the end of the season with a performance this week.
By the way, I know in the home league you've got Frank Harris, and I'm playing against Zachary Franklin and Decorian Clark from UTSA this weekend. Not looking forward to it at all. But hopefully our last pick here does well this week against a pretty tough defense, though. Xavier Worthy, he's averaging 13.5 fantasy points per game. But now that Ewers is healthy and someone that can actually throw a deep ball to Xavier Worthy, you just kind of expect that. He would be really difficult. Let me put it this way. He'll be really difficult to sit any week against any defense that they play. So I expect Worthy, even though he had a disappointing game last week with just 1 touchdown and 29 yards or whatever, I expect that to skyrocket as a feature receiver on this team.
So there's a couple of guys that I think that if I was, because I wasn't able to be a part of this redraft with the travel New York Comic Con, there's a couple of guys that I would say I would have looked at potentially as draft picks in this top 24. I'm not saying they would have been the number 1 guy, but possibly with my second round pick. You got Kalen Laborn from Marshall. You got Sean Tucker from Syracuse. You got Nathaniel Dell from Houston. And then also Dante Cephas from Kent. I know he's had an up and down year, but in the last 2 weeks, he's had 22 receptions, 364 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So if you're looking for trends going into the end of the season, I think he's finally getting off the schneid there for Kent. Those are 4 guys that I would have considered as well to potentially be drafted in those first 2 rounds.
For the sake of time, let's just skip on news and notes today because we've got them all posted up in Discord, and then we'll be posting them all as the updates come in for Bryce Young and everyone else. We'll be posting those up in the Discord, so just go there, check it out before you set your lineups or as you're setting your lineups, and it's more up to date than Fantrax typically.
And today we're gonna go through the top 5s. You guys come on here to be able to hear the top 5s. We're gonna go through a little bit quicker. You guys know how this works. If you're listening and it's week 7, you know the way that the CFB Dynasty site works. If you are up here and this is the first time, get your butt subscribed to CFBDynasty.com so you can see these rankings as well. So we're going to go to the top 5 quarterbacks. You've heard us talk about 3 of the 5 guys in the top 5 for this week, but there's a couple guys that you have not heard us talk about. So at number 1 is Drake May from UNC. B-Mac, is there anything else we want to say about him we haven't already said?
Huge over-under 67 points. Should be a shootout between UNC and Duke. So like all the numbers point to a really good game yet again for Drake May. And the health of the receivers continues to improve. So man, got to feel good about Drake May, except for me because I'm playing against him and those UTSA receivers this week. Yikes.
Then number 2, we got Todd Centillo. Over-under for him at James Madison is the same 67. So they expect to shoot out there at James Madison. They have a 10.5 point spread. They expect him to put up tons of points.
And at number 3, we've got your boy, Frank Harris, UTSA. Last few games, he's put up 48, 39, and 29. And, another good, healthy 64 for the over-under. But it's expected to be a total beatdown of Florida International.
32-point spread in that game in UTSA's way. Never would have thought you'd see a number like that against a D1 opponent.
The data doesn't look good, but I'm hoping they run the ball a lot.
Number 4, Austin Reed from Western Kentucky. His numbers have been down slightly since that Florida International game, but Florida International, like we said, Frank Harris is playing them this week, but Austin Reed is still a quality quarterback that's out there. Highest over-under in the top 5.
So at 5, this is assuming a healthy Bryce Young against the Tennessee passing defense that is ready to give up touchdowns. Even if Tennessee were to win the game, you would expect Alabama to be able to go up and down the field Jahmyr Gibbs is a great play this week, but we just don't know the health of Bryce Young. They keep saying day to day, but he didn't even play at all. Even though you might have got a Bleacher Report alert like I did that he was in for the game and going to start after he was announced as a starting quarterback, but didn't happen, didn't play. So I don't know exactly what to think. And next is Max Duggan. He's at 6, and that's another huge over-under, 68.5. At this point, with no news, I would probably start Duggan over Young, and this was, again, just assuming a healthy Bryce Young, but we can jump to running back.
All right, so running backs, top 5. First one on the board is DeWayne McBride from UAB. I love seeing these guys from smaller schools being at the top of the rankings. BMAC, why is DeWayne McBride at number 1?
Yeah, he's been super consistent, and he's scoring a 23 a game, and they've got the game script, so to speak, is what is hugely in his favor at UAB with a 24-point spread. You expect them to get up and start just pounding the ball early and often, and they'll finish the game just like that. It's a projected ending score 43-19, UAB over Charlotte.
And then the next 3 guys we just talked about in the redraft: Bijan Robinson, Texas and Iowa State. Number 3, Jahmyr Gibbs at Tennessee. And then Kayla Lamborn from Marshall playing against BMAC's favorite college outside of Florida, the ULL Ragin' Cajuns.
That's right. Shout out to when that video game comes back, and I'll run a dynasty back with the Cajuns. But yeah, he put up 2 touchdowns last night with that game happening, so he lived up to the bill. And then at RB5, we've got Corum, even though he's going up against Penn State. Let's see what this Michigan O-line can do. Plenty of other good options as you go down the list with your boy LaDamian Webb and Rocket Sanders and Jaden Ott, but all of that data is there for you to optimize your lineup this week.
All right, jump down to wide receivers. Again, I believe most of these guys we spoke about in the previous segment, we'll still list them. There is one guy that's new to the list. So first, number 1, Rashee Rice, SMU versus Navy.
No need to say anything there. It's going to be a high-scoring game, 35-23 projected final there.
Wide receiver 2, Chris Thornton from James Madison. I think part of that is because his quarterback is ranked so high. He's got to throw the ball to somebody. Chris Thornton is the guy.
Yep, 67-point over-under there. James Madison projected to score around 39. With UTSA next, with the next 2, they're projected to score 48.
And again, that's one of those where if you have them both on the roster, this happened a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week with Ohio State, where you had the 3 and 4 both from Ohio State. If you've got them both, you want to start them both, but it's always tricky when you have 2 guys from the same team ranked so high. Will they split the yards? Will they split the targets? You just want to hope that it's a shootout, and that for some reason Florida International is able to score some points, so that way the starters can stay in that game for a little bit longer.
No, that's not what we want at all this week. I'm playing against both of those guys.
And then number 5 is a guy that has not been talked about, I don't think, ever on this podcast. Who we got at number 5, B-Mac?
What a shame. Rome Odunze? I don't know 100% how to say the name, so I apologize there. But yeah, huge amount of targets for this guy. He's looking like a total baller that you can start every week. Last few weeks, he's had 26 fantasy points, 27.6, and then 16. But the targets are extremely consistent, and it's one of the biggest over-unders of the week is Washington, Arizona, 73. I think that might be the biggest.
I think there's one other one that's, but I haven't seen any one of the over-unders that's that big.
Yeah, 44-28 there, projected final score.
So that's the top 5s. Again, there's so much more information out there. We only talked about 15, 16 guys. If you're in a 12-team league, we may not have even touched on a guy that you have. It's easy to go with those top 5s, but there's going to be guys farther down the rosters that are going to be who's going to help you get your wins or make you get those losses if you don't play the right guys. So urge you to get up to cfbdynasty.com, subscribe. You also want to get on the Discord. We're going to have to jump here real soon, but you know that we can't jump before BMAC gives us his brisket lock for the week. BMAC, who is your brisket lock for this week? I see the name. I know it's going to pain you. It has got to pain you as a Florida Gator fan to list this guy as your brisket lock of the week. Who is it, and how much heart failure did you have for typing that name onto the list?
So real quick, last week we went with Dominic Richardson, and he was fine. 67 yards and a touchdown against Tech. Man, with 19 carries, I thought if he averaged 5, it would have been a pretty solid game for him. Only a couple catches added to that. So it was all right, but we're not picking a top 5 starter here. And same with this game. Hendon Hooker is my brisket lock selection this week. It just feels right for Tennessee, and it's really just based on a feeling where they're at home, they're against Bama. Bama's got a wounded quarterback coming off a tough, hard-fought game at home against A&M, which was a surprise. So it feels like this is going to be the moment for Tennessee, and if it's going to happen, maybe they'll bust out the cigars in Neyland this week.
That is a very adventurous brisket lock to pick a quarterback going up against Bama. I'm impressed.
Well, I'm hoping it does well. So we'll see this week. Kind of a QB 15 start for us, even though he's doing really well, and that Tennessee offense is really thriving. And they still don't have Tillman back, but we'll see how it goes.
He'll still be out for a couple more weeks, but definitely hoping. Tillman was my first round pick in our fill-in draft, so I'd love to be able to see him get back out there on the field and do something for me.
Same.
All right, so we're gonna have to jump here. BMAC, tell people where you want them to be at so they can get in contact with you, and where else are you going to be podcasting? You're going to run a podcast tomorrow night or on Saturday talking about starts and sits.
We're going to do that, host that right in the Discord. Probably no show this week. We'll just continue to do it right in the Discord. So hit me up there, start sit if you have any questions. We want to hear about your trades and all the different things and get this Discord popping, because we've got some cool tools that we're working on as far as fantasy-wise. Might not launch this year, but it's going to be great. And it's all the target data that you want, all that stuff. So it's going to be a huge undertaking on our part to kind of switch databases, which will affect nothing that you guys see. It's just a lot of work on our end to deliver some cool stuff going into next year.
And if you're a fan of a certain team or a certain conference, do not hesitate to go up there and make sure you put your news and notes, because there's so many teams in college football. It's very easy for busy guys like us to have some news or notes slip right past us. So we encourage you to go up to the Discord, get those news and notes up there. If you get a news or note that we share on the podcast, we'll make sure to give you a shout out. So for me, Matt Knowles at Dr. Anguish, Dr. Anguish on Twitter and Instagram. As you see, I've got tinyurl.com/AirsTPP2. Myself and my creative partner at In Symmetry Creations, Steph Cannon, are going to be launching a new Kickstarter for one of our comics, which is going to be the second issue of Heirs of Isildur. The Perilous Prospects is going to be on Kickstarter this coming Tuesday. We'd love to see you guys jump on over there and bookmark it, and then go up and get some cool stuff, be a part of that community when the Kickstarter launches. So we'd love to see you guys follow us there as well. BMAC, I've had a lot of fun. Sorry, you apologize to you guys. A little bit shorter podcast than we've had in recent weeks, but I've got to jump onto another call that I can't miss. So really appreciate you guys being up here. Hope you guys take this extra 7 or 10 minutes, go get yourself some good brisket so you can have a brisket lock, be powered up for your own brisket lock. BMAC, any last words from you?
I need some brisket. So that's it.
All right, guys.
Got to hit this week.
We thank you guys for joining us this week. We'll be back next week with our Week 7 reactions and Week 8 as we're getting ready to head into the playoffs. We love you guys. We thank you guys for being with us on the CFB Dynasty podcast. See ya.